Hi, I'm Vivian Wei, COO of Salesforce Unified Agentforce Platform. 95% of Gen AI projects fail not because the tech doesn't work, but because leaders are still playing checkers when the game is chess. That's why I sat down with Brian Evergreen, former competitive chess player turned Fortune 500 advisor. We dug into why incrementalism kills AI strategy and the bold moves boards must make today to actually scale. Hey, good afternoon, Brian. Thank you so much for joining me on this AI Heroes and Headaches podcast.
My pleasure. Good afternoon. I'm happy to be here.
You're definitely like a top thinker, as you're like a Thinkers50 group member. And also, I learned you're part of recognize the expert Dory Clark's groupie, right? Like me, and also other top thinkers around the world. I'm really excited to have a conversation with you because you have such an interesting background. So maybe give us a little bit of the history. You mentioned over the weekend that you have this chess education startup. Then you went into Microsoft. What's the history there?
Yeah, so I was an internationally competitive chess player as a kid. So I used to represent the U.S. versus other countries, and my big claim to fame during that time was playing against Josh Waitzkin, who the movie Searching for Bobby Fischer was made about. And then when I was 12, I had decided if I wanted to retire or stay in chess and quit school and do basically chess and homeschooling full time. And I really liked being around other kids, and I loved playing sports, and so I decided to retire. I'm doing air quotes from chess. And then I started teaching chess, and it was $20 an hour on Saturday. I'd go to a Barnes and Noble back when they used to have tables inside of Barnes and Nobles you could sit down at, and I give lessons. And then I sort of had two or three people, kids. I would do this. Would teach this, teach to every weekend. And then when I was 17, we'd gotten to the point, my brother and I were both doing this. He's my older brother. And we realized, oh, we have a lot more kids that want to learn this and a lot more parents that would love for their kids to learn chess than we have bandwidth for as individuals. What if we tried to come up with a company for this? Fast forward through college, right? Like building the company all through college. By the time I graduated, we were in about 200 schools. And then once we could focus on it full time, then we got to about 400 schools before I decided I wanted to try something new. And I joined Accenture strategy because of my chess background. And my first client ever was Microsoft. And the first project ever was strategy around an analytics initiative. And I fell in love with analytics. And so that's how I sort of bridged over from strategy into the analytics, and then ML, and then eventually software, and then eventually AI world.
It's interesting because if I reflect on like chess was the AI early playground, if I think about that, right? Like
Right?
mid
Yes.
20th century, chess
Very
was
rough.
like seen as this test of intelligence. Early
Yeah.
pioneers like Alan Turing and Claude Shannon, they wrote about how machines might play chess before
That's right.
computers were powerful enough to do it. And there's the association between chess and your foray into AI, and then okay, so and then you wrote a book also,
I
right?
did.
Now you go from like predictive into autonomous. Like tell us about the book you wrote.
Yeah. So when I joined Microsoft as an FTE in 2019, I was a US AI strategy lead, and I was flown out to meet with Fortune 500 C-level exec teams to basically help them develop their AI strategies. Most of them, had been thinking through everything through the lens of digitalization. Like, okay, let's modernize something. Let's go from should we go from on-premise to the cloud? Like that was
Mhm.
their mindset. And we were like, hey, we've got some really cool AI tools. And so let's come and try to help them figure out how this is valuable, what to do with it, etc. And so I started out thinking, okay, I'm going to pick up the playbook. First of all, I've just said, what's the playbook? And then they said, hey, that's why you're here. Welcome. And this, which you know all too well from the various positions you've held, right? And then I said, okay, well, surely, if I look across academia, research institutions, books, I'll find the playbook. And of course, as you can guess, there was no playbook. And so it's no wonder that, at the time it was 87% of AI projects fail. Now the new MIT study says that 95% of Gen
Uh-huh.
AI projects are failing. And so, but I started basically looking through and thinking, okay, I have to create a new system. I have to create a new playbook
Mm.
designed for the complexities of today. And even, we're already how many years past the blockbuster,
Mhm.
blockbuster going under, and the stories that come from that. But we've had so many other things that we've been able to learn from since then. And so I basically start incubating a new sort of methodology, a new framework for doing strategy
Mhm.
at the C-suite on AI. And with AI being I'd say the inflection point for a need to, because you don't need to think through the vision of the future of your organization to
Mhm.
decide to make incremental improvements through digitalization, through digital transformation of, we're going to move it to the cloud and that's going to save us this much money, or it'll be this much more performant. You don't need to have a vision. Like you can just have an operator mindset for that.
Right?
But if you're trying to harness the potential of AI, we've seen it does not work if you're just trying to make incremental improvements. And so, I was incubating this framework. Later, moved into Microsoft Research, leading autonomous AI co-innovation, continuing to build on that. I started writing online about the next era of transformation, because I was trying to help people see that this isn't just another stage of digital transformation. It's
Yeah.
something new. It's a new era. And so I started calling it autonomous transformation, and
Oh,
started
uh-huh.
sharing
Super
about that.
interesting.
Yeah, because we've been moving from analog to digital and now toward autonomous. Not to say companies are autonomous or that the transformation is somehow autonomous.
Yeah.
Those are misnomers, but that the new mile marker we're moving in the direction of is harnessing more autonomous capabilities. And so I started sharing about that online in 2021.
Uh-huh.
And then Wiley reached out and said, "Would you like to write a book?" And I said, "I mean, that's too good of an opportunity to turn down. Why not?" I used it as an impetus to say, I'm going to reach out to all the best thought leaders. So I had the good
Yep.
fortune of interviewing folks like Kim Scott or Seth Godin, and getting a well-rounded, beyond just the technologist perspective, but
Mhm.
also people leaders and marketing experts and finance experts, like a full picture. I ended up interviewing over 50 people, including a lot of C-suite execs. And like systems thinking leaders from, and so on. And so, and I put it all together into this book, Autonomous Transformation, Creating a More Human Future for the Era of AI, that came out in August of 2020. It was a little actually before its time,
Yeah.
because everyone's finally talking about autonomous agents, but the book came out in August of 2023.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what I was going to say. If I think about, you started that journey back in 2021, at the time, like OpenAI didn't launch yet, right? And we didn't
Right.
go into this huge like generative AI era. And now everybody's figuring it out. So you're before the time. And so, okay, let's rewind back a little bit. During your time at Microsoft, leading the
Mhm.
AI strategy, tell us a little bit more about like what was the biggest hero moment in terms of what AI delivered on its promise, and also what was the biggest headache that kept you up at
Ooh.
night?
Okay, I have to think through things I can share publicly. Um, I think one of the biggest hero moments was, we had a few. The one that I was the most excited about was, I think, because it's so visceral, and I think it shows a potential that can span across industries,
Mhm.
was we did a partnership with Bell Flight. It's publicly referenceable, where what we did was they were landing their GPS, their drones through
Mhm.
GPS technologies, and which was fine. It was already autonomous, but it had a limitation that it could not land somewhere where it didn't have connectivity, because it was leveraging that technology. And so we were thinking through, well, there's got to be a way to use AI to be able to land completely autonomously with no internet connectivity. And that was the vision. And what we ended up doing was, it had nothing to do with generative AI.
Mhm.
In fact, none of the agents that we were building did. But yeah, so that's a whole nother topic we can get into if you'd like. But so what we did is we created a first principle simulation of the actual like like various scenarios, and obviously there's millions of scenarios in which you land a drone. We had a human, we had pilots create the curricula by which the planes would by which they would teach someone else to land. So
Mhm.
and they broke it down into different individual skills instead of it just being raw reinforcement learning, which takes a
Mhm.
lot more compute. We
Mhm.
had a human-based curriculum for it to learn from and reference as it tried essentially just reinforcement learning within the context of this simulated environment. And it took obviously millions of iterations in the cloud, so to speak, right? We weren't crashing drones in order to learn this, right? And it got to the point where it worked, and we were able to flatten the neural net and export it to a lightweight Java applet, leaving behind all that training data, right? And then just deploy it directly on the drone to just land autonomously. So that skill of landing a drone was now learned and mastered and didn't require any more training, didn't require, and that you can see how that's not something you'd need generative AI for. And
Right.
so, yeah, that's probably from a hero perspective. Not that I'm the hero of that story, but just something that we were able to achieve with AI that it shows you the potential of when you get it right, what you can really achieve. And you can sort of imagine across, especially even if you can do that in the physical world, it's even easier to train stuff in the digital world, right?
Yeah, and like this is pretty fascinating, right? Essentially human trained the machine and then the machine did the job. I guess the question is we always talk about human in the loop. In
Yeah.
that success story, what role did human play both before, during, and after? And what were some of the like one or
Yeah.
two key takeaways as we get into this agentic era?
So before was setting the vision in the first place and creating the curricula by which the agent would, we would now call it an agent. We were just calling it autonomous AI, but would train. Um, and then during was, I mean, we had obviously humans that were leading the training, so to speak. Reinforcement learning is was the actual method, but there's humans that are like data scientists, AI engineers,
Yep.
depending on which nomenclature you want to use, that were
Yep.
actually doing the work. And then afterward, then we had a stage of real world trials. See, that's the thing. There's so much work that we do as people that I 100% agree with you that humans in the loop is very critical for so
Mhm.
much of our work. And at the same time, I think there is a portion of work that of digital labor, as I think you call it at Salesforce, that where we won't need humans in the loop because it's so manual and transactional, where and depending on the level of risk, right? And so this was one where for it to just land autonomously, we didn't need. I don't know all the specificities. Like for example, if it wanted to land somewhere where it looked like there might be people around, if that then it checked in with a central team to give it the okay or not. I'm not sure. But the actual skill of just landing on a clear runway, it didn't need a human in the loop anymore, which frees up human time to go do other things. There's
Yeah.
so much work for us as society, as people, still ahead of us. We haven't cured cancer. Like we haven't actually
Yep.
colonized the moon or any other planets. Like there's so much more that we have, and let alone all the things to fix here on Earth.
Yep.
So to me, any labor that we can, take off our plate so we can focus our creative and best energy on all the work still to be done, the better.
Yeah. And it's really interesting. I think what you depicted is an evolution of from the building to tweaking, improving that reinforcement learning to then afterwards, where it's like for the drone to be fully autonomous, I'd imagine you still have for a while people to be constantly monitoring the performance
Oh
of
yeah.
that drone, right? Like we're
Oh yeah.
speaking of the real world example, because the parallel I can think of is when we launched the help agent. It wasn't like, hey, the agent is deflecting 85% of the case customer support resolution like right away. Over time, there's the directing of traffic. And you know what? Behind the scenes, we have agent managers whose
Right.
full-time job is essentially to constantly be monitoring the performance of those agents. And if I think about the like in the real world example of people who are who are people managers versus agent managers, skill sets are probably a little bit different. And then also the in, extent and like intensity of that monitoring is also different.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Because if you're managing people, that there's a social contract there. There's a social relationship, a whole layer of social interactions that you need to account for and manage. When you're managing or, taking care of agents, that's gone. Right. There's no potential
Mm.
social interaction whatsoever. It's just, it's more transactional. And it depends on the type of agents, right? Like there's so many different sort of flavors. And so if you have a true what I call a symphony of agents working in tandem and
Mhm.
orchestration, and as a leader you're sort of composing that future of work against which
Mhm.
that symphony of agents will execute, then you have to think about a lot of levels of complexity and abstraction, but the actual management day to day becomes less social. Like it's not social, so all the way flattened in terms of social there. And I think that also sort of tunes where we like the kind of work that we can focus these agents on, because I think in a lot of cases people
Yeah.
have said we can come up with agents that'll take care of and do all these things and remove all this work and all these jobs are going to go away. And I think that's sort of a limited it's a slippery slope fallacy taking place, because
Yeah.
they're forgetting that so much of the work that we do, even in like even if you're just not just, but if your job is a financial analyst, there's a
Mhm.
lot of social work that social interactions that
Yep.
are embedded in the work, a lot of empathy and understanding about the
Yep.
specific nuances of the leaders you're working with, the politics in the office, the goals of the organization,
Yep.
a lot of layers of complexity that I think are still human based,
And
today.
I think you embarked on something that's extremely important. And maybe that's why I'm just projecting, right? That's why I interviewed people like Kim Scott, who's very focused. I mean, I think of like radical candor. How
Exactly.
do you work in the social system, right? Like with that construct according to the different psychology. Because I always thought as a COO, I think about, okay, for a large organization, we're running a machine. There's
Right.
like certain cadences, but the reality of that, like how you engineer that machine, I actually rely on a lot of our team to kind of
Right.
figure out based on the context of the organization, the business needs, the different leaders they're working with,
Right.
their preferences. Then you kind of engineer what that machine looks like. But in reality, you articulate it so well, it's actually a social system, right?
Yeah.
Like from just the technology, but also to like the social component is so important, but understated.
I love that you said that. So one of the core things I talked about in my book. So Frederick Taylor, I'm going to nerd out on you for a second. So
Mhm.
Frederick Taylor wrote in 1911 a book called Principles of Scientific Management. He was the first ever man. You may have heard of him. First ever management consultant.
Mhm.
And in the book, what he did was before he came on the scene, like Ford and other places that were manufacturing, every widget that you would get from them would be different because it would depend on who worked on it, right? Um, and so he introduced the idea of process. And he was like, we need to do process engineering, process, optimization, process improvement. And so he would bring a team that would, and it's called Taylorism. They'd bring a team and they would do stopwatches and they'd watch how all the different people made the same thing. And then they'd come up with, okay, here's the most optimized version of that. Now we're going to train these people. And he called it the laborers of sluggish mind. We're going to train them on how to do the best. I know it's not great, right? And I say that to precede what I'm going to say in a minute, but he said, it's not, we're going to train them how to do that. And then that way everybody will do the right process. Right. And so, and he wrote in the book, in the past, the human has been, or the man has been first. In the future, the system must be first. And I would say that he succeeded. What you just talked about, how we see organizations as a machine, when you think about it, that's an inheritance that we have from the Industrial Revolution. Everything's a machine. And when
Mhm.
you want to optimize a machine, you look for problems and you eliminate problems. So if you have I use an example in my book that if you had if people in Disneyland, which is like, it's funny to imagine because Disneyland is such a tuned and operating system, right? But if you went to Disneyland and cast members, which is what they call the frontline workers in the actual park, and they started being rude to people, and maybe there's even quite a few of them, let's say. This isn't a real story. I'm just, it's hypothetical.
I love the cast members, by the way.
They're amazing, right? So
Yes.
if you imagine that quite a few of them start being rude, and they're getting reports back to leadership from, from Disneyland goers, so to speak, or from families. The industrial mindset era would be to say, well, that's a problem. We need to eliminate the problem. And so we're going to fire those people and hire new cast members, right? Like that's the problem solving, right? And so, but if you think about it, as a social system, you think, okay, Disneyland is an ecosystem, is a social system. There's relationships all over. If this is starting to pop up across the organization, across Disneyland and across our cast members, could it be that there's something about their incentives, something about their schedules, something else that's causing them to not show up their best, that isn't that person is a problem that needs to be eliminated, but actually that we need to rethink whatever it is about all the systemic context of what we're doing, for those people to be able to show up their best. And so the inheritance that we have from the Industrial Revolution to say that everything is a mechanistic, mechanical machine that we need to optimize and fine tune, actually is one of the things, leadership mindsets, that we need to leave behind us and move into a new era of saying, okay, in the past, I wrote in the past, the system has been first, just over 100 years after he wrote this, right? In the past, the system has been first. In the future, the human must be first. And people sometimes, I would say, depending on their ethos, they would say, yeah, well, I want to figure out how to get value with AI. And then I think it does make sense to try to align it to like a more human workplace and better outcomes for society and people. And what I found in my research was actually it's the other way around. Like when you think about it, like you could tell when I would come on scene and I would hear, and I'm sure you've experienced this, Vivian, when you go into like, as you're rounding the corner, going into like, let's say a meeting, even a boardroom, let's say, the energy in that room as you're walking around the corner, if it's tense, like you could cut through it with a knife, versus if it's like people are chuckling and there's laughter and there's some like congeniality and friendliness in that room, I would be able to tell without even having heard what they're working on. I would know the cultural context of this team. They're assuming that they're all smart and they're hardworking and they have the right level of investment, they're going to be able to succeed at this. But I would even more easily be able to tell the cultural context of this team is too stressed out. They're too frustrated with each other. I don't care how much money you throw at them. Like, this isn't going to work because the people that are engaged are not going to be able to show up as their best selves because of the people context of. And so from a leadership perspective, we have to evolve as leaders to be able to effectively lead in this new era.
Yeah, and I think about you touch on a couple of things that are extremely important. One is, even as I design the machine, I think about, hey, if humans are not bringing the best selves to work, there is something underlying that's happening, whether, who knows, right? If there's wage issue, incentive systems issue, there's a macro issue, the neighborhood they're in, maybe like facing exogenous factors. So as leaders, we're responsible for understanding that without just jumping to the conclusion and like say, hey, this is not working, right? And that's number one. And then the second one is, you're talking about, hey, there's the how people work as a team. There's the organizational culture, and how each player on the team interact with each other. And you just reminded me of Ted Lasso as I was watching the first couple episodes, right? It's about this dysfunctional team with some super high power stars, but it's not a highly functional team of players.
Right. Well, that sparks for me something that I love to talk about, and I'll just say it in maybe under 15, under 30 seconds. Let's see if I can do it. But the performance of the system of the organization is not a sum of its parts. So to your point, like you could have all the best. So like that's why when you have a leadership team review and everybody's scorecard is green, but you're still losing customers, it's like that doesn't make sense. Marketing's green. They got a lot of reach. Sales got, landed more customers. Customer support has, great NSAT or CSAT or whatever. And so, but the truth is that performance of the system isn't the sum of its individual parts. It's the sum of the interactions between the parts. So if you have a car that has the best transmission in the world and the best engine in the world,
Yep.
but they're not working together, it doesn't matter that they're the best. I would take a car with a worse engine and a worse transmission that work together, because then at least go somewhere, right?
Yeah. It's super interesting you bring this up. I'm noticing from all of our agent deployments internally within our Salesforce
Mhm.
agentic enterprise, agentic transformation is different from digital transformation in the sense that it's not just IT led, it's actually business unit led, powered by IT.
That's right.
And the business unit leaders are accountable for the KPIs, but that cross functional collaboration, the
Mhm.
1 + 1 has to be equal to 3, is critically important. And right now, what I see in the market is, CEOs think, hey, I hired a head of AI. All of my AI pilot to production problems are going to be solved. And as you already articulated from all of the research studies that's coming out recently, the MIT case study, that's not the case.
That's not
And
right.
essentially, you're saying, hey, we need to adopt the first principles from Patrick Lancioni and have more cross-functional team leadership. And you probably already wrote all of this in your book.
I
Right.
Yes, I've been trying to tell people, right? I wrote an article in June 2023 in CIO.com called "Chat GPT is not your AI strategy." And I'm like, hey, I've been saying this, guys. Like, please. And so, yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's a systemic issue, and I think what's happened is we've had some really phenomenal thinking and work
Mhm.
on, especially in some retail organizations where of distributing and some manufacturers distributing more autonomy throughout the business.
Yeah.
And then what I think's happened is that thinking brought into AI. People thought we're going to have bottoms up innovation with AI. Well, let's focus all of our money or our investments on making sure everyone, has access to Claude or ChatGPT or something, and
Yeah.
make sure we train them. And then, and I always joke that if you wanted to build Duomo, in Italy, you
Mhm.
wouldn't do that by distributing hammers to everyone in the city and training them on how to use hammers and assume that they're going to like build Duomo. Like it has to be a tops down initiative. Like somebody has to have a vision,
Mm.
and then you have to have a strategy, or in Duomo's case, an architecture. You have to be willing to invest. You have to buy the materials. You have to, right? And so,
Yeah.
but part of the problem is that so many leaders, the way you get to becoming a leader is not by having a vision. In most cases, it's usually by being a great operator, by being great at executing on
Yeah.
work that was handed to you, on a scorecard you were given. And
Mhm.
that you keep getting promoted, right? You
Mhm.
get into a point where, oh, now I need to come up with a vision. I've never had to do that. There was no Vision 101 in the MBA class, MBA that I
Mhm.
got, or even just undergrad. And there's very limited resources for creating a vision, which is an inherently vulnerable,
Mhm.
based task. And so people, when they don't even necessarily know how to do that, it doesn't even come to
Mhm.
their mind of I need to go do that. They think, okay, well, let's pick a good use case for AI.
Mhm.
And in the
Mm.
Duomo example, I say, yeah, like let's build a door. And then in use case number 2, let's build a wall. Like, are you eventually going to get to Duomo use case by use
Mm.
case? No, you're gonna get there by a vision. And then
Yeah.
you'll fit the work that you're going to do and the capability building into the strategy to get from where you are to the vision that come up with.
Wow. Hey, this is quite profound. In other words, if you're a CEO, you would suggest, hey, work with your leadership team, figure out what is that grand vision looks like.
What's your
Then,
Duomo, right?
right. And then like what is everybody's part and how they collaborate to build it. And then the other example you as you were describing, I think I always think about, there's 3 types of different brick layers, right? One is like, hey, I'm putting brick by brick, And then the other person says, hey, I'm building a wall. And then the third person is like, hey, I'm building a Duomo, ideally in an agentic powered enterprise. You want everybody to be able to paint that vision and
That's right.
also be able to name, like, hey, I am building this part, and this is how it impacts the entire organization. And this is
That's
where I
right.
find my purpose, my value, my contribution to this amazing vision.
That's right. That's right. Because I feel like every organization, why shouldn't every organization feel like NASA felt when they were sending someone to the moon? Like, obviously, not everything you do is as exciting as the moon for organizations, but why not harness that skunk works, that moonshot energy,
Mhm.
where
Yeah.
people are genuinely thrilled. They're being pushed to their limits to achieve something, not necessarily in terms of work-life balance, but like their creative energy, their strategic energy, their collaborative energy to achieve something that they all think, wow, wouldn't it be incredible if we can achieve that? And by the way, with the fact that people can quiet quit, or the fact that people can go upskill, reskill, find new jobs online like that, a vision has never been a better, it's the best retention tool, because then
Mhm.
people believe in what you're doing and they want to see it through.
I love that. You're clearly like a futuristic thinker. I feel like, let me ask this. Looking forward in 2030, the longer term vision, right? You had already predict this back in like 2021, this whole era. Now finally the world has come to this realization that we need to go through this agentic transformation. But in 2030, if we're to sit down again, what is the one change in
Hmm.
how enterprise leaders like lead AI, who will separate the biggest winners from, the not so great losers,
Right.
right? Like,
Yeah. So the biggest change that will separate, like, the change they can make now to make that difference, or okay.
yeah.
Um, well, there's a few. I mean, there's how much time we got. So I think one is that I think that in the book I write about, I don't know if I specifically called it. I think I did call out Michael Jordan, because for me, basketball was over once he retired. No scourge on anyone who continues to watch it, or I'm sure many would argue whether or not he was actually the best ball player of all time, but he was my favorite. And so, but I use the analogy of, if he went to a one-on-one tournament and he's goes into the locker room, gets dressed up, gets ready, and then plays his pump up song. Let's say, I don't know if he had a pump up song, but I'm assuming he did, runs out on the court only to realize that it's actually a 5-on-5 tournament, not a one-on-one tournament. So he doesn't have a team. It's just him. Like, even though he's Michael Jordan, he's going to lose. Like, and
Mhm.
I feel like that's one of the biggest lessons for, I think, as we look at going into this era of complexity that we face now, is that it's no longer company versus company. It's company versus ecosystem. And
Mhm.
so for an organization to be able to think through, not only, okay, like, because you have upstream, downstream, suppliers, or a value chain for most, I mean, every major organization. When you get to a certain scale, you're
Yeah.
not just independent. And so they all benefit if you win, and
Mhm.
suffer if you lose. And so having the right strategy that is across that layer of complexity, where the ecosystem is making a pivot in a way that makes it incredibly difficult for your competitors to outplay you. I think
Mhm.
that's one big difference. I think a second that is a big focus of my work these days is making strategy visible. And so
Mm.
most strategies, if you think about it, are invisible. Like, they're abstract. So if you were to describe to me, and I'm not going to pick on you, but if someone were to describe to me, well, this is our strategy for the next 3 years, 1 to 3 years, let's say,
Mhm.
they're not almost ever able to show me like a single pane of glass, like, this is the strategy. It's usually, well, we have this PowerPoint, let me walk you through these 40, 75 slides, or they're trying to describe it in layers of abstraction verbally, or it's in a memo that's basically a novel length, right? Or it's a few bullets in an email that isn't a strategy, it's just tactics, right? Like, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do that. Like, that's not a strategy, that's just a
Mhm.
list of tactics. And so I think one of the kind of breakthroughs I had in my work was coming up with a framework for making strategy visible, so
Mhm.
that I could literally show you, at the top, like think of a decision tree. Like this is the future we want to get to.
Mhm.
These are the things we believe would have to be true for us to get there. These are the, let's picture like 6 nodes. These are the things that have to be true for those to be true, and
Mhm.
so on until we get back to where we are today. And then you can take off whole branches of that and say, this isn't core competency for us. So we're going to back to the ecosystem, right? We're going to need our
Mm.
to build that. This
Mhm.
is something that this is something the whole country needs. So the National Science Foundation is either
Mhm.
or should be releasing a grant to have somebody figure that out.
Yep.
That's going to be a research institution. Once they get the breakthrough, we're going to pull it in and operationalize on top of it, whatever. But like an actual comprehensive strategy. Instead, most organizations like OKRs, for example, I think they were better than what we had before. But
Mhm.
there is a limitation where you're saying this is where we want to go. So if I said, you and I are I know you're based in San Francisco. I know you're not there today, but if I picked you up and said, hey, we're going for a road trip, and you said, where we're going? Well, we're going to go to New York. Great. But instead of actually routing to New York and deciding where we're going to stop or how we're going to get there, I just say, well, let's pick our first 3 like indications that we're headed in the right direction. So
Mhm.
from San Francisco, we're going to get to, depending on what we're going through, like we're going to get to Las Vegas, and then we're going to get to, I don't know why I would go down that way, but anyway, we're going to get to these 3 cities, but then, hey, that was our that's our attainment. That's our goal for the quarter. So let's pull over. We'll wait till next quarter, map the next 3 cities on the way to,
Yep.
like, we're taking forever to get somewhere that we could be much more direct. If we actually map.
Mm.
So making strategy visible, I think, will be a big one. And then
Mhm.
I think the third one that I'd say is for leaders to be able to, um, I mean, it's about, I hate to, yeah, I don't want to oversimplify, but it really is about people. And I think most people go through this arc in their journey. Like if you look at people who've recently retired from major companies and now they're going to go into consulting,
Yep.
almost every single thing they have is like heart consulting or like, human AI collaboration. It's all, they all talk about it, and they're right. I think sometimes it's seen by people in operating roles as sort of like fluff. But I do think that the actual, like the ability, if you think about it, like if I could have 10 the top talented people in the world, let's say you and I together, like we each we're starting new companies and we're each going to get, like, let's say they're even out and they're the 20 top, we're just cutting it right in half. We each get 10.
Yep.
And the only difference then is how we manage them.
Yep.
Like the management style is going to make all the difference. And in fact, I would take a lower talented team managed by the
Mhm.
right leader than
Mhm.
the top talent managed by the wrong leader. And I think that for leaders to evolve, the command and control style that worked in the 20th century
Mhm.
doesn't work anymore. And I think that in the same way that like we've finally gotten to a societal tipping point where most young people don't smoke, right? Like the majority
Mhm.
don't smoke anymore because
Yeah.
it's not even something most people consider. I think we're going to get, I think we're finally breaking through this, not generational in terms of age, but just like
Yeah.
leadership, experience, mindset,
Yep.
where I think in 10 years time, people will look back at command and control leadership as like a total culture shock of like, why are you leading like that? What are you like,
Yeah.
you think it's going to work? Like people are going to leave like right away. And so I think that's the third major shift that's going to make a difference for leaders.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing the wisdom, because I think you touch on 3 really important things. So first is stakeholder capitalism, right? Like, hey, everybody in your ecosystem matters, and how you act, how you serve them, and how they work with you matters. And
Mhm.
this is actually tightly connected with the second point you make, which is the make strategy visible. So if everybody across your stakeholders see that vision and can find their place
Yes.
in that vision, now you're creating a bigger ecosystem where we're charging towards a bigger goal that benefits everyone in that system. And then the last bit, which I think is like super critical, because now people are talking a lot about talking crap about all the Gen Zers, but the reality I'm seeing on the ground as an operator is we think differently. They have no constraints in terms of, traditionally how organizations are made, and they're AI native. They're not afraid to roll up their sleeves and do things whether it's creating TikTok videos, which creates a different, like, B2C, B2B. I mean, it changes how people do marketing, right? I mean, you see the entire the creator economy. But I think about, as a business leader, how do you harness that creativity, not just in the young people, but across the entire organization? You're totally spot on. The command and control model, where, hey, you have to be at this place at this time because I said so, doesn't work in that model, right? It's about, hey, how do I uncover the superpower of these people? And then how do you get them to work together? We all work together towards that bigger vision, where you talk about, hey, making the strategy visible. Yeah, so thank you so much. I really appreciate this conversation. Hey, how do people get in touch with you? I know you're also running this future solving club. What's the call to action here?
Yeah. So, I mean, if people want to get in touch, it kind of depends on what they're looking for. There's really a couple of things I do. One is I have the future solving program where I
Mhm.
help leadership teams set a vision for the future, create a visible strategy for achieving that vision, and then working with to scale that across their organization. So that's one. A second, totally different, but I think complementary, is the Future Solving Club, which is a private network of senior executives that dialogue regularly with thought leaders, because not only do we need to have good ideas for what we want to do, but the
Mhm.
ideas about how we are going to do those things, achieve anything that we want to achieve, makes all the difference of whether or not we're going to be successful. And senior executives often don't have a great place to commune with each other and
Yep.
really talk through like these ideas that shape the future, especially without being sold to. And so
Yeah.
yeah, so the Future Solving Club is a place for that. And then, yeah, and if people want to connect with me, they can find me on my website, brianevergreen.com. They can find me, the company is thefuturesolvingcompany.com. And then I'm on LinkedIn, is my main social platform.
That's how we connected.
That's right. Yeah, you
Everybody
found
in the group. So, feel free to ping Brian on LinkedIn. I pinged Brian on a Sunday evening, right before Labor Day, and we hopped on a call right away. So thank you so much again, Brian.
it.
And wish you all the best. Take care.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.